Hills fam, thanks for joining us online this weekend. Next weekend, we are at City of Axum Park for our annual church picnic. It's always a good time. Bring a chair, bring a dish to share. We'll bring the protein, the yard games, and it's a time of breaking bread together, getting to know one another. And on this series on friendship, as we've been talking about, it's an opportunity to maybe to start a new friendship or to grow in a friendship that you already have. So next Sunday, join us 10 a.m. We won't be at the school. We will be at City of Axum Park, Cherry Park, for those who've been in the neighborhood for a minute. Now, a couple weeks ago, we had a sports camp. We hosted as a church about 70 kids, and one of those kids was my daughter. And I was doing a very parent kind of thing. One afternoon, I was asking her about the sports camp. Did you have fun? Did you learn anything? No. And then I asked her, did you make any friends? And she said, yeah, I made a friend. I was like, sweet, awesome, you made a friend. What's your friend's name? And Bennett said, I don't know. I was like, wait, you don't know your friend's name? She said, no, we were playing and she asked if I wanted to be her friend. And I said, yes. I guess when you're 7, friendship is easy. It's like, you're 7, you're about my height. Can we be friends? Yeah, we can be friends. Unfortunately, as we get older, friendship becomes more and more difficult. And we've been talking about friendship the last few weeks. I've been trying to paint a picture of how we are made for friendship, we need friendship, and yet we view friendship at the bottom of the hierarchy of relationships. We have such a low view of friendship because of various myths that we believe, things culture tells us, the myths of romantic love and marriage as the ultimate, the pinnacle of all things, a sexual drive that informs that drives all of our relationships. If you missed that one, go back and watch last week's teaching. But we need a different path forward as we consider what it means to have spiritual friendships, covenant friendships. And I've been saying every week that we need 2 to 4 spiritual friendships, people that we can walk through, that we can journey through this life together. Today we're going to look briefly at Philippians. It's a letter in the New Testament, and Paul, he's writing to people who are trying to figure out how to get along, trying to figure out friendship, and throughout the letter, one of the cool things, and we'll touch on this a little bit later in the teaching, is like this friendship that Paul has with them and this reciprocation that they have with one another. We'll start in Philippians chapter 2, the first 4 verses say this: Therefore, if you have any encouragement from being united with Christ, if any comfort from his love, if any common sharing in the Spirit, if any tenderness and compassion, then make my joy complete by being like-minded, having the same love, being one in spirit and of one mind. Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Rather, in humility, value others above yourselves, not looking to your own interests, but each of you to the interest of the others. And this passage, it is a reminder of what it looks like to have friendships as Jesus followers. Friendships as Jesus followers, it makes certain demands of us. And our relationship with other believers is not without commitment. But these demands, they're not meant to be restrictive or oppressive, even though at times we will be required to say no to ourselves, say no to our own wants, say no to what our own desires in order to say yes. And it's one way that we push back against what comes naturally like seeking our own interest. That is our natural inclination, to look out for ourselves, to look out for number one. But as kingdom people, we have a higher calling, a higher commitment to one another. And our friendships ought to reflect this pattern of the kingdom of God. Our friendships, they're not based on what we can get out of it. This is different than what we might find in the culture around us, like the quid pro quo. Like, I offer something, you offer something, I offer something, you offer something. Like, I'm in it as long as I'm getting something out of the relationship. That's how friendships normally work. But a kingdom mindset is a self-giving. It is walking in the way of Jesus. And the title of my teaching today is Barriers, Busters, and Builders. Barriers, Busters, and Builders. It's an acronym, so it must be true, right? So it must be true. So we're going to look at some barriers to friendship, some busters of friendships, and some builders of friendships this morning. So the first, what are some barriers to deep spiritual friendships? Some barriers that we all face. And one barrier is technology. Technology impacts our friendship in a myriad of ways, a plethora of ways, a deluge of ways, a profusion of ways, a whatever word you can use for excess, whatever synonym that you can think of ways. Technology impacts our relationships. So for example, there is a decrease in emotional awareness of others. The more time we spend on our devices, on our phones, we become less aware of our surroundings, and we become incapable of reading even emotions in other people and in dialogue. It has that type of impact on us if we're not careful. There was a study done by Stanford University, and this was like 20 years ago. So even before the proliferation of smartphones and screens with us all the time. But they found that for every hour we spend on computers, again 20 years ago, traditional face-to-face interaction time with other people drops by nearly 30 minutes. So for every hour on screens, 30 minutes less face-to-face with people. And so we're losing the ability to read other people, to read emotions and to empathize. And last night, Elora and I, we went out on a fancy date to Olive Garden. Yes, Olive Garden. We had a gift card someone had given us, and so we're there, and we had gone and put our name in. We're waiting, and I look across. There was a group of people. There was 3 people sitting down right next to each other, and they're doing what everybody does. All 3 of them went to the restaurant together to spend time together, to share a meal together, and they're all just right here, just doing the scroll. Technology, it impacts our relationships, and we have to be cautious. There was an article from Scientific America, and it said this. It says, although having all our pals online from moment to moment seems intimate, we risk losing personal touch with our real-life relationships and may experience an artificial sense of intimacy as compared with when we shut down our devices and devote our attention to one individual at a time. Technology. Like we're losing our ability to relate to one another. Another barrier of technology is our high value on efficiency. We have a high value on efficiency. We are a productive society. And one of the ways we measure our production, our efficiency, is the GDP, right? The gross domestic product. It's a measure of economic activity. Like, is it growing? Are we being productive as a society? Like, are we going into recession? Like, we need to produce more. We need to be more efficient. And so technology, supposedly it helps us become more efficient. And I think it does in some ways. We want maximum productivity with the least amount of effort. Maximum productivity with the least amount of effort. And that is the goal in much of life. And do you know what isn't efficient? Do you know what isn't efficient and requires more than minimum effort? Friendship. Friendship is not efficient. And I am for efficiency in general. But when I stop to consider my own friendships, I've got to admit that I am drawn to efficiency even in relationships. Like, is this, and it hinders, don't having those deeper friendships, those deeper relationships. There's another barrier in technology, and it's just the social media FOMO. Like that fear of missing out. And we've talked about this before, so I won't go into great lengths, but what happens, though, when you see a post from a friend or a group of friends in particular, and you see them and they're having a great time. Maybe they even went on a little excursion, maybe up in the mountains or maybe someplace farther away, and is your first thought like, oh man, look at those friends of mine. I'm glad they're getting to spend some quality time together. I'm happy for them. Or is our initial carnal, fleshly response more like, what? Why wasn't I invited? Like what? Is it jealousy? Is it to be offended? Is it questioning your status as friends? Like I thought I was in a group, and now here they are having a good time, and I am missing out. And so I don't know if social media FOMO is the right wording for that, but it's like the effects of seeing other people having a good time, our friends together and us not there. I have a group of college buddies, and they weren't my closest friend group. Like I had group, like I'd say like 1A, 1B. Some of these guys were guys I played basketball with and were on the team together. And a couple years ago, I saw that, so it wasn't like the 1A group again, so it wasn't like the 1B group. I think we had different sets of friends. They had all gone on a trip together. They're at a resort somewhere where there's a beach, and they're hanging out, having a good time. And then I saw it the next year. And then I saw it. This was an annual trip. And not once have these fellas ever thought to include me. Like I said, it wasn't tier 1 friendships, but tier 2. But it's like, oh man, I wish I had been invited. Like we fear that. Social media makes us feel all kinds of ways about friendship. So technology can be a barrier to friendship. A second barrier to friendship is busyness. Busyness. We are too busy. Do you remember it was just a couple years ago when the pandemic shut down everything, our calendars were cleared, and we were bored. We had nothing to do, no place to go, and it was a fringe benefit of the pandemic. Like we weren't as busy. We were able to just catch our breath despite the fear that we were living in. And how fast did we go right back to our busy lives? Our calendars crammed with all kinds of activities, all things to do. It's like we didn't learn. And friendships, they take time. There are no shortcuts. There was no skipping the time required to build a lasting friendship. It's impossible to have deep covenant type friendships without time spent together. On the survey that we sent out, I mentioned last week, like the number one hindrance to friendships was time, was busyness. And the second most common challenge was vulnerability. Like how do we become vulnerable with people and friendships? And I think the two are related. Like the more time we spend with one another, it builds trust. And the more trust that we have, the more we'll be able to be vulnerable with one another. And that's why at the outset of the series, I said, we're going to be on this for a few weeks. And at the end of this, if currently you don't have those deep spiritual friendships, at the end of this series, you won't have deep spiritual friendships. And it's not because it's not possible, but it's because it takes more than 2 or 3 weeks to develop these type of relationships. But I hope this series is a catalyst that pushes us forward. It pushes us in the right direction, our journey on friendships. We have teams of college students that come to the Hills Church. They come to the neighborhood throughout the year. Spring break, we had a group here last week, and then they had to leave before we had our Sunday service. And they're a ministry that's called Chi Alpha XA. It stands for Christ Ambassadors. And what I see in Chi Alpha are these incredible friendships that these college students have formed. And it's not atypical for college students to form deep friendships with your roommates or your affinity groups that you're in college, and friends for life. But there's something about the friendships in Chi Alpha where these young people are following Jesus together. They are on mission together. They are making disciples together. Like, these friendships, they go deep. And so, like, in the span of one semester, you can go from hello to the most intimate of relationships. 3 or 4 months. It happens. It's not uncommon. But I warn the college students, like, we have times together that after college, when they get into the local church, that those same type of deep friendships are possible, but it's going to take way more than 4 months. It may take 4 years. And so, like, you've seen the circle of relationships, I'm sure, and there's different ways of labeling these types of friendships. But so you've got, like, on the outside, acquaintances, and then circumstantial friends, so friends at work or hobby kind of friends, friendly connections, warm friendships, and those you are intimate with, maybe family, 2 or 4 spiritual friends there. And in a setting like college or in a campus ministry, you can go from acquaintance all the way through those circles in a short amount of time. Outside of that, as we get older into adulthood and we're all adulting, it just takes longer. Like, it is still possible to move from outside of the circle to inside the circle, but it's not happening in 3 or 4 weeks. It's not happening in 3 or 4 months. Like, this requires time. It requires time, and our busyness gets in the way of that. Like, no one's showing up at your doorstep. You answer the door, like someone knocks and they jump out of a box and like, hey, I'm here to be your friend. It's just not how friendships work as adults. They've got to be developed, and technology and efficiency and busyness, they're all barriers, they're all roadblocks. And there's one final barrier. One final barrier is past hurts. Past hurts. If you have ever had a friend, there is a high probability that you have been hurt or let down by a friend. All kinds of ways, all kinds of reasons that we're let down. Maybe you were committed to your friend. You thought your friend was committed to you. They weren't. Maybe the friend got married. Maybe you got married and things just weren't the same. Maybe they treated you poorly. Maybe they found other friends, and just over time, like, you were in the inner circle and all of a sudden you found yourself further and further away to maybe you were just circumstantial friends, even acquaintances. Maybe they broke a confidence. Maybe you were vulnerable with them and they just stabbed you in the back. Like, if to have deep friendships, to have friendships at all, is to open ourselves up, to be vulnerable. C.S. Lewis, the great Christian thinker and writer of the last century, he wrote a book called The Four Loves, and this quote is pretty common, it's pretty popular, you've heard it before likely, but I want to read just a bit more of it. But here's what he says. To love at all is to be vulnerable. Love anything and your heart will certainly be wrung and possibly be broken. If you want to make sure of keeping it intact, you must give it to no one and nothing, not even an animal. You must carefully wrap it round with hobbies and little luxuries and routine and avoidances of entanglement, and then lock it up in the casket or coffin of your own selfishness. And this means that in the long run, the alternative to tragedy, or at least the threat of tragedy, is damnation. For in the casket, safe, still, unventilated, in the darkness, it, meaning your heart, will go bad. Not broken, but finally unbreakable, impenetrable, resistant to all good and joy. That is a eye-opening statement, and I hope a heart-opening statement for us. If you are human and you've been in any type of relationship, you've experienced some level of hurt. And not all of us have experienced the same amount of hurt or the same depth of hurt, but we've all experienced it. We could all tell stories of how we've been hurt in relationships, and despite that, I still believe that we were meant for friendship. And God wants to bless you with good friends, Frank Andrews in The Art of and Practice of Loving says, "It seems impossible to love people who hurt and disappoint us. Yet, there are no other kind of people." Like, isn't that the truth? Like we all have baggage, and in friendships, our past hurts can keep us from moving into future friendships and to other friendships, because we go into protective mode, that is understandable. And friendships can be a blessing, but they are messy, they are painful, and I think we need to acknowledge the hurt in our past. And friendship and being vulnerable doesn't mean we have to be vulnerable with everybody. It doesn't mean we have to overshare with everybody. It doesn't mean we should be sharing our deepest struggles on social media. I advise against that. In fact, Proverbs 18:24 says, "A man of many companions may come to ruin, but there is a friend who sticks closer than a brother." Saying, like, you got too many confidants out there, confidants. Like you could find yourself in trouble, but there's a friend that's closer than a brother. So this is we move forward in this series, like taking a moment, and as we're talking about friendships, you've probably already been thinking about some of these past hurts. What past hurts are keeping you from moving others? What from moving into other friendships? What past hurts are keeping you from shutting others out? And we would never, like if I climb a ladder, fall off a ladder, break my arm, or one of my kids falls and breaks a bone, I'm not going to be like, "Hey, just rub some dirt in it, you'll be fine." Like no, it's not just going to get better over time. It needs attention, and our wounds from friendship, when they're deep, like time doesn't heal all wounds. Like they leave scars, and we need to do some work, and we need to seek the guidance of the Holy Spirit and counsel from wise friends, and maybe even Christian therapists who can help us with wounds from the past, so that we can move forward into friendships. And beware of these friendship barriers. We also need to beware of friendship busters, things we do in friendships that can make the friendship explode, like that just aren't healthy. So here's a quick list. You probably already know these. When we're finished, you could add to the list. But here's just the thing. I'm just put up the list, and we're not going to go into too much depth. But here are some friendship busters, some things to stay clear of. Unclear expectations, gossip, betraying confidentiality, possessiveness, controlling or smothering behavior, competitiveness and negative comparison, a quid pro quo arrangement. I did this for you, so I expect something in return. What would you add to the list? What have you seen in your friendships that have been friendship busters? In our micro churches, we might talk about some of these in a bit more depth. So those are our friendship busters. See, that was quick, painless, and so we're going to move to the positive side. Like how do we want to show up in our friendships? And so we want to look at friendship builders. We're going to look at 5 of them, just so you know what's coming. And we're going to do that in about 4 minutes. 5 of them in 4 minutes, and I'm done. Maybe 3 minutes. I'm going to try. Again, after watching, make sure you check out a micro church where we can talk more about these. The first friendship builder, any friendship, you need to be knowing and caring. Knowing and caring. This is like ABC kind of stuff, elementary kind of stuff. But this is not a one-time act, and sometimes I think we forget. Like just knowing, asking questions instead of providing answers in friendships all the time, caring, like just the basics. And we see this knowing and this caring in the letter to the Philippians. Again, we started off with that. I want to come back to it just for a moment. There is a reciprocation of affection and concern for one another. So Paul makes a couple statements. He says, "I hold you in my heart, and I yearn for you all with the affection of Christ Jesus." Like that is some deep love that he expresses towards them, some knowing and caring. He's in prison, but he sends Timothy to check in on them, to make sure everything is going okay. Like he is showing concern for them. And then in return, the Philippians, they express affection for Paul. They send Epaphroditus to care for him spiritually, financially, to take care of this mutual knowing and caring for one another. That has to be central in our friendships. Second is initiating. We can't just sit back and wait for a friend to show up at our front door. Like that's just not the way that friendships work, and we have to initiate. We have to take the first step sometimes. We have to do the work. 1 Thessalonians 5 has a couple of reminders for us. 5:15 says, "Seek good for one another. Encourage and build up one another," verse 11 says. So friendship is active. It is not a passive endeavor. And so maybe part of that being active is praying for spiritual friendships. Praying that God would bring someone into your life, but it's also showing up in places where you might meet a good friend. Maybe it's showing up at a hangout that we have, or a micro church. Maybe it's showing up at the church picnic. That just different ways. It's just a couple. There's ways outside of the church to meet friends as well, but it's being active, taking the initiative. A third friendship builder is cultivating. Like we need to do the work. We need to be consistent. As we mentioned earlier, this involves time and intentionality. We have to cultivate. We have to put in the work. We have to stay consistent. And as we spend more time together, we begin to build trust with one another. A fourth friendship builder is safeguarding. We need to protect our friendships. And so when we have put in the time, when we have built the trust, and our friends begin to be vulnerable with us, we have to be trustworthy. We can't go spreading their business around. We can't go sharing juicy facts with other people of their lives. And so we need to safeguard our friendships. Our final friendship builder is one anothering. One anothering. It is a made-up word based on the New Testament, has 47 times that we are told to do something to one another. Like love one another. And this is, Jesus makes these statements, Peter, Paul, John, James. They're scattered across the New Testament. And here's just a brief list. I can't, for the sake of time, go through them all. If you want to take a screenshot or pause it. But these are just a few of the one another statements. So being gentle, be kind, bear with, forgive, seek good, don't complain against, confess sins, love, speak truth, don't lie, encourage, stimulate one another to love and good deeds, pray for one another. What if our friendships were marked by these one another's? What if we pushed back against the maximum freedom, no commitment type friendships that we see in our culture, and we started practicing these one another's? Like, how healing would that be in our friendships? How formative would that be? So I'm out of time. I've shared a lot of information today. Do this, don't do that, and it was a lot. And you may find this to be too much, to be too overwhelming. But just what's maybe one thing? What's one thing that you could begin to practice in your friendships, in your acquaintances that are moving from acquaintance to circumstantial friends, to warm friendships, to intimacy? We're moving in. What's one step that you could take this week? And I want to encourage you that God is with us on this journey, and that every friend you have today was once a stranger. But God is at work in our lives. Friendship is a gift from God. And if you are seeking friendships, I believe that God is at work in your life to do just that. Grace and peace.